Yes. Good. Okay. Right. So welcome to this remote meeting of the Scrutiny Board Environment, Housing and Communities. We are meeting remote today because we actually missed a meeting because of the untimely death of Her Majesty the Queen. So this is the meeting that's been shunted along. So I'll need to go through some, which may sound unusual for people who are normal listeners at Scrutiny. This is a remote consultative meeting of the Environment, Housing and Communities Board. The public section of the meeting will be webcast via YouTube and is accessible by following the links on the meeting page. This remote session has been arranged following the cancellation of September's public meeting due to the death of Queen Elizabeth II and the period of national mourning. For the purposes of information and transparency, last year, a High Court ruling clarified that as of the 7th of May 2021, local authorities are required to conduct physical meetings to take formal decisions. Under this consultative arrangement, we will therefore not legally be able to take formal decisions, and the consultative status means that some of the usual formalities will not take place at the start of the meeting. Should any decisions be taken that require formal ratification, such as the recommendations to the Executive Board or those relating specifically to statutory functions, these will be referred for formal approval at the next physical public meeting of the board on the 5th of January 2023. So that said, number one, declarations of interest. Does anybody get any interests to declare? No, I don't think so. Right. In terms of introductions and apologies, we've got apologies have been received from Councillors Can and Councillor Brooks. And Councillor Thompson is meant to be substituting. I can't see her on the screen. That doesn't mean to say that she's not behind the scenes somewhere, but I can't see her on the screen because obviously there's only a limited number of people who can be on the screen.
She's here, Barry.
I'm here. Morning.
Here. Morning. You are here. Yeah, fine. Welcome, and thank you for substituting. Right. I will now ask the scrutiny members to introduce themselves, and we'll get the officers to introduce themselves afterwards. So is Councillor Akhtar there? No. Councillor Finnegan? No. Councillor Maloney is, because I saw...
Morning, everyone. Can you see me?
Yeah.
Councillor Annie Maloney for Beeston and Holbeck Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Wadsworth? No, we're not doing too well today. Councillor Carlisle? No. Councillor Graham? Trish Smith? Councillor Trish Smith?
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Trish Smith, Pudgey Ward.
Councillor Walshaw?
I am definitely here, Chair, yes.
Yes, you are. Yeah. Councillor Cunningham?
Morning all, Councillor Lou Cunningham, Armley Ward.
Councillor Leigh?
Morning everyone, I'm Sandy, Councillor Sandy Leigh, Otley and Yeadon Ward.
Councillor Tudor?
Morning, Councillor John Tudor, Killingbeck and Seacroft Ward.
And formally now, Councillor Thompson.
Good morning, Councillor Eleanor Thompson, Guiseley Rawdon Ward and substitute.
Okay, Becky?
Hello, Becky Atherton, Principal Scrutiny Advisor.
And Tash?
Hi everybody, Natasha Prosser, Clerk.
Thank you. Right, so if we can now move on to our guests for this particular item. So Councillor Harland?
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everybody. Councillor Mary Harland, Executive Board Member for Communities.
Is Paul Money in the background?
I am Councillor Anderson, but if you can see me, hopefully you can.
Yeah.
It's Paul Money, Chief Officer for the Safer Stronger Communities team. Good morning.
Thank you. Nadeem?
Morning, Councillor Anderson. Nadeem Sadiq, Head of Community Relations and Cohesion.
Samantha Powell?
Morning, Councillor Anderson. Samantha Powell, Third Sector and Migration Partnership Manager.
Thank you and welcome. Now our external guests, Hannah Bailey.
Morning, everyone. I'm Hannah Bailey. I'm the Chief Officer at Voluntary Action Leeds.
Welcome. Chris Hollins.
Morning, Councillor. I'm Chris Hollins. I'm the Independent Chair of Third Sector Leeds.
And last but no means least, Francesca Wood.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Francesca Wood. I'm here from Forum Central, representing the voice of health and care in the third sector here in Leeds.
Thank you. Right, so our first paper today is ensuring the resilience of the third sector, who rose to the occasion during the pandemic and have continued with their good work ever since. But like other things within the city, we do try and scrutinise them to make sure that everything is going smoothly and that all sides of the partnership have a chance to have their say. So what I would first of all like to do is to invite Councillor Harland and the various officers and then the guests themselves to have a say. So we'll start off with Councillor Harland, then Mr. Money, and then we'll go through the three guests if they just want to give some introductory comments. So Councillor Harland.
Thank you, Chair. I think, as you've just alluded to, the third sector partnership is really important in Leeds, and we continue to invest in that. This paper gives sight of how we want to go forward and the ambition that we see as partners going forward. It goes through how, the third sector really stood up during COVID and what they are facing now with us going through the cost of living crisis. As I said, it's a really valued relationship. I think it's really important that we hear from Francesca, Chris and Hannah today and get their views of how they see it going forward. But it's also always important that Scrutiny has overview of things like this and your opinions as members of that Scrutiny are very valued.
Thank you. Thank you. Right, Mr. Money.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. Yeah, I mean, I'd just probably start by if I may, just echoing the point I think that Councillor Harlan's just made, which is, for Leeds to be a thriving city, then we absolutely know that we need a thriving third sector, especially, with the challenges that we're faced with at the moment. But in our conversations with colleagues, a number of whom you've introduced or they've introduced themselves, Councillor Anderson, there are also, despite those challenges, I think some exciting opportunities for us as well to take forward pieces of work specifically with with individuals, with families, and with communities across the city. We have been doing some really close work with the third sector through our established links historically in the city, I think, but we've kind of ramped that up in recent weeks and maybe months, particularly as the kind of cost of living crisis has begun to really bite into capability for all sectors really across the city, and we see increasing our collaboration with the sector, third sector and public and indeed private sector, as being kind of the way forward. And as Councillor Harland says, the crisis that was the pandemic, I think potentially creates, the way that we approach that creates somewhat of a blueprint for us. So the report that is before the panel today really kind of details how we intend to move forwards on that particular agenda. It's probably as much as I'd want to say at this stage, Councillor Anderson, by way of supporting that introduction, if that's helpful.
Right, thank you. I'll take our guests in alphabetical order, just like when you were back at school. Sorry about that, but it's the only way I can think of allocating the guests around. So first of all, we'll have Hannah Bailey, then Chris Hollins, then Francesca Wood. So Hannah, if you would like to go first, please.
Great, thanks, Councillor Anderson. Yeah, I guess just to follow up on the points that Councillor Harland and Paul have made, obviously it's set out in the report that's in front of you, but just to really reiterate that in terms of the city's response to the pandemic, the role that the sector were able to play in supporting those arrangements, and that response to support communities was really critical. And in my conversations with counterparts from other parts of the country, I think the strength of Leeds' response was due to the fact that those partnerships and relationships were well established already. And that gave us a really strong platform on which to design that citywide response. Obviously, the sector did feel the impact of the pandemic in various ways. But I think the general picture is that the sector weathered that storm of the pandemic. However, coming into the cost of living crisis, is potentially a more uncertain time for the sector, with this kind of dual situation of rising levels of demand within communities, coupled with the impact on organisations that are less resilient as a result of the pandemic. So that's something that obviously we're concerned about, and have been having conversations through Third Sector Leeds with our partners across the city. And our message is that partnership working is more important now than it's ever been, despite the fact that we live in difficult times and there are difficult conversations that we need to have. But again, those strong foundations that we have in place, I think, put us in a good position to move forward. We've got some very immediate issues to tackle, and the partnership conversations and workshops that we've had recently, and the principles that we've agreed in order to kind of take some of those conversations forward, I think are really valuable. And then we've got longer term work to look at securing the ongoing resilience of the sector, because I think, over a decade, we've got really positive partnerships and relationships in place, and a strong commitment from the city to supporting the sector as part of the overall system within the city, not in isolation. But we can't be complacent about that, and we want to continue to sort of drive forward. So there is the agreement to develop a third sector strategy for the city, which we're going to be taking forward over the coming months. And as part of that, it is about understanding the value of the sector in the broadest terms possible, not just about the cost of the sector, the value of the sector and how it contributes to the overall system within the city, and first and foremost, the needs and aspirations of communities. So I'll probably leave it there for my sort of...
That's fine. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Mr. Hollands?
Thank you. I'll just add briefly to that to emphasise the growing relationship that has been over the past decade, really, between the statutory authorities and the third sector. I think more than anything else, what it's developed has been a trust that we are all working towards the same end. We've got difficult times. We've had difficult times in the past decade. We've got even more difficult times now. The analogy that I've used is that we're all in the same storm, even if we're not all in the same boat. I have been involved with the discussions that have gone on between third sector and the local authority in particular for the past 7 or 8 years, and I have really valued the contribution that has come and the lead which has come from the local authority, which I think has been exemplary during that time. We do face very, very difficult times. The practical issues that we face now during COVID, I think Hannah's sort of already started to set out those, and I think I'll hand straight over to Francesca, who will also add more practical issues that need to be dealt with.
Thank you. And there's your introduction, Francesca.
Thanks, Councillor. I'll take that introduction. Just to make a couple of observations in terms of that context, we've talked about the relationships and partnerships that have been developing over a number of years. And I think that's really important because it's about the maturity of our relationships and how we can build and accelerate on that. That's going to stand us in incredibly good stead. It means that we're really well placed for a more collective systems approach now, to the problems we collectively face as city partners, not just as individual organisations or even individual communities. We've heard a lot, I'm sure we will hear more about the challenges in terms of resources, and that's why the coordination of the work we do across third sector infrastructure organisations, with the council, with the NHS and with other private and public and statutory partners is so important, because that's the only way we're going to make better use of the limited resources we all have. It's the only way we can play to our strengths, because so that we're not trying to ask everyone to be everything. And it's the only way we can reduce duplication and minimize that duplication. So that coordination, that working as infrastructure partners with the council is incredibly valued by Forum Central, I'm sure the other third sector colleagues as well. The other point I wanted to make, just by way of introduction, is around, obviously Forum Central is very much involved in the health partnership and the work we're doing to improve health outcomes here in Leeds. But what's becoming increasingly obvious through the work that we're doing with the Leeds ICB is the importance of the wider determinants of health. So whether that's environment, whether that's education, whether that's communities, whether that's housing, it really is about the importance that those aspects have on improving health outcomes. So we're very much here today from Forum Central, not just to look at the health aspect of it, but to really make sure we are joining everything together for, particularly for the most vulnerable people and communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Right. So what I'm now going to do now is just open it up to member questions. So anything within the report, and I'll allow a degree of latitude, even if it's not in the report, as long as it's relevant to the subject, I will allow the conversation. So if you can use your yellow raised hand to indicate, but if not, don't worry, just wave at me. And as long as the signage is not rude, I'll probably respond to you if you don't get your yellow hand, because not everybody necessarily knows how to use it. So, Councillor Smith first.
Thanks, Chair. Great report, thank you, and my very sincere thanks for everything that the third sector are doing. They've been absolutely tremendous. My observation is, how do we get the different third sector organisations in a community to work more collegiately? You know, I've seen across the city there are a couple of, I won't say clashes because that makes it sound very negative, but overlaps is probably a slightly better one. And it would be good if we could somehow unify the offerings so that we didn't duplicate effort and we didn't duplicate expense. And I just wondered if that had been thought about, please.
Who would like to volunteer? If you just put your hand up or speak, if somebody would like to come forward on that one. Anybody like to lead? Hannah?
Yeah, I'll begin on that one, and I'm sure colleagues will have contributions to add. Yeah, Councillor Smith, on that issue, I think obviously the third sector is incredibly large and diverse. So we estimate 3,500 groups and organisations in Leeds, everything from multi-million-pound turnover organisations to volunteer-led groups within communities. So a very diverse picture. But I do think that the experience of the pandemic, one of the positive legacies of the pandemic is increased collaboration amongst third sector organisations, particularly at a local level. So following on, and it is outlined in brief in the report, but following on from the community care hub structure that was set up as part of the pandemic response, what's emerged and evolved out of that is the Leeds Community Anchor Network. So across the city, we have organisations that have stepped forward to be the community anchor for their area. It's primarily on a ward basis, but we do have some variation across the city. But that network is about organisations kind of stepping forward as a kind of lead within their area, but very much around working in collaboration with the other groups and organisations in an area, nurturing that local ecosystem and seeking to ensure that there isn't, you know, duplication of effort, that there is partnership working, that actually, in terms of the needs and aspirations of communities, that local ecosystem of groups and organisations are working collaboratively to meet those needs and to demonstrate sort of values and behaviours such as sort of generous leadership, so larger organisations providing support to smaller groups and organisations, and also really the value of collaboration over competition, because we know that, you know, over the last couple of decades, actually because of the environment that the sector is operating in, that competition has sometimes, you know, been an issue. I think really, if we can take one of the really positive legacies of the pandemic for the city in terms of the sector, it is that renewed kind of focus on collaboration over competition. And I'm sure others may want to add to that.
Right. Do either Chris or Francesca want to come in on that? Chris, and then Francesca.
Thank you. Just to add to that, as Hannah said, 3,500 organisations. So inevitably, there's going to be some organisations that are working in different parts of the city, which are doing similar things to other organisations in the rest of the city. Both neighbourhood networks and the community anchors, which Hannah's described, attempt to bring together organisations at a locality basis. And during the cost of living crisis, Third Sector Leeds has, during the past 2 weeks, we've been organising locality meetings, so bringing together groups of organisations at localities to discuss the issues that they are facing in those localities. They've been very well attended across those meetings, and we will feed back the information that's coming out of that. But there are common issues which come across all of the cities for all of the organisations. It's been interesting too that there have been some local council representations at those meetings, so they've also fed into the issues. Clearly, that with such a huge diversity of organisations, there's going to be some overlap. But whilst there is overlap, I don't really see it as being a problem, and we're trying to make sure that, insofar as we can, we maximise the benefit of cooperation.
Thank you, Francesca, and then I'll bring in order Sam, and then Mr. Money.
So we've been talking about, you know, how COVID really accelerated the partnership and coordination work across city partners. The same's been true of third sector organisations as well. Often pre-pandemic, third sector organisations, you know, had their head down, were getting on with their work. And the pandemic really, because of the way we were sharing information about what we were doing and the role of the third sector infrastructure organisations to make that visible, was a way for organisations to realise who else was out there that they could partner with, collaborate with, or indeed that they didn't need to start putting on services because there was actually someone else, another organisation on their doorstep who were doing that or that they could connect to. So the more that we can do to make third sector organisations and their networks visible, the more we minimise the risk of both duplication, but also some of that competition. And that competition is also mitigated by the way the infrastructure organisations work in the third sector. Our grants programmes, the network meetings that Chris was just talking about, it is how we are facilitating better partnership and collaborative work.
Thank you. Right, Sam Powell and then Paul Money.
Thank you, Councillor Harland. I agree with everything that Hannah, Chris and Francesca have said there. I just wanted to add in that sometimes medium and small organisations do feel some barrier and challenge. There is certainly keenness to work in partnership, but often that's around conversations, connection, and with some organisations funded in such a way that they're funded for delivery, not necessarily to do the joining up and partnership thing. It can be a struggle to know which meetings to go to, which partnerships to connect with, and still to be able to deliver your organisation as well. So I think there's a really strong desire to, but that can often be highlighted as one of the barriers.
Thank you. Mr. Money?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Anderson. I mean, some of the things I was thinking of raising have kind of been referenced there already by other colleagues. I guess I would just say that Councillor Smith's question, actually, the answer to it lies at the heart of this work and the paper that colleagues have got, because you know, at a time of decreasing resources, and increasing demands, then it's right and proper that we look to work and collaborate as effectively and as efficiently as we can, and that's essentially what this piece of work is about. Actually, I'm just minded to just reference briefly, Councillor Anderson, the next paper, which and one of the colleagues has talked about. I think it was Hannah talked about. This is about locality working, and it's not just about the third sector. There's an onus, I think, on all sectors to work as effectively as we can. And the next paper that the panel will be discussing actually details that in and kind of is a useful bridge, I think, to this conversation.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Smith, do you want to come back again?
No, I'm fine with that. Thank you, Chair. I think that's some very good points. Thank you, everybody.
That's fine. Right, I've got Councillor Tudor, then Councillor Cunningham, then Councillor Thompson. So Councillor Tudor first.
Yeah.
Oh,
this is it's absolutely amazing to hear this, because this is exactly what I've seen happen in an incredible way in Seacroft over the past 18 months. All of the local sectors, because of the pandemic, was forged in the fire of the pandemic. The third sector came together in a way that has stuck. And just before this meeting, we have the Thursday morning meeting, and we have it every Thursday. Earlier in the pandemic, they met every day in terms of helping people with medication, food shopping, all that kind of thing. But they realized it worked so well that it's permanent. And I put in the chat the website that they've just launched, We Are Seacroft, the We Are Seacroft Collective, anchored by the LS14 Trust. But all of our what they've done, two main things that they've done is working together is very good financially for efficiency. As councillors, we have just they put in a combined spreadsheet, if you like, of financial asks from us from ward-based initiative, and we signed it all off together. I think a total of about £60,000 for all of the organisations, but they all work together. They're all talking to each other. It's very efficient. It's very sensible. The other point was that they learned that let's put the offering. Let's not worry about what all these organisations are called so much, but what is the offering? What is the important thing for the community? For example, food. Well, how are these organisations all going to work on the topic of food? People don't need all the names of the different groups and companies. That can a layer of bureaucracy that can get in the way of what we're actually trying to deliver. So I definitely encourage you to look at this first version of our website. I only know my ward. I'm sure great things are happening across Leeds, but we're very excited and really, quite, to be honest, quite proud of what has been forged in Seacroft recently, and it is really thriving, and I'd encourage you to have a look.
Does anybody, any of our three guests, want to make any comment about that, or just take it as it is, which is a compliment to the great work that's going on in the Seacroft area? Fine. Councillor Cunningham and then Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks all for the presentation. So I'll echo, that I think the third sector and all the work they do, the city couldn't function effectively for our residents without it. I think that we have to be careful that we don't take that for granted. And I don't mean that in a way that obviously we can all come on and praise it. I mean that we have to really keep track of how we're funding, how we're feeding into these organisations, and recognising the work that they do, not just as a kind of platitude, but as a real driving force to recognise the work that's going on. Linked into that, and some of it does overlap with maybe the locality paper next, I'd like to spend a bit of time for people to think about the real grassroots issues that emerge. And I know that we talk about kind of things on a ward basis, but what I'm tending to find with some of the funding elements is that there aren't always clear-cut definitions in terms of postcode cut-offs and things like that. So for example, in my own ward, most of Armley is LS12, but we've got brackets of it that are LS13 and LS5. And sometimes I'm finding that some projects are assuming that all of LS12 is Armley, when in fact a lot of LS12 is Farnley and Wortley. So I'm just interested in how much that information is fed through to organisations that are working with our communities. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Anybody want to answer that one? Any of the officers want to say? Hannah's taking her mute off, so that means she's suggesting she wants to talk. Hannah.
Yeah, perhaps just a brief response. I'm sure others will want to add to that. I mean, I think just in terms of your earlier points, Councillor Cunningham, absolutely, you know, there's a lot of good work to celebrate here, but also, yeah, not being kind of complacent and continuing to kind of keep focus on the issues. That's where we feel that the development of the new third sector strategy gives us a really good opportunity to articulate in one place kind of the value of the sector and the work that is going to happen, continue to happen across the city, across the system, to keep that kind of live and on the agenda. On that subject, last year, Forum Central led on work to produce a state of the sector report, so really valuable data about the sector and its makeup. Plans to refresh that report over the coming months, which this time Voluntary Action Leeds will also be working in partnership with Forum Central on that piece of work, which is really positive and will give us that kind of data and that evidence base on which to continue to sort of plan our work. I think in terms of those sort of very grassroots issues and the work that happens at a kind of grassroots level, again, you know, I'm not suggesting it's the answer to everything, but this is where I do feel that the community anchor network, you know, gives really good opportunities to ensure that at a local level, you know, groups and organisations are networked, are aware of one another's work, can support one another's work, and ultimately ensure that, you know, it's communities that benefit from, you know, the activity that goes on locally. As I said, the anchor network is primarily sort of on ward, organised on a ward basis currently, but there is some variation there where, you know, for communities in different areas, those ward boundaries, you know, don't mean as much to them. So there is definitely that kind of mixed picture, but some really good opportunities to ensure that, you know, local groups and those grassroots kind of issues and initiatives are well linked up through the community anchor network. Thank you.
Thank you. Francesca?
Yeah, I would just add to that we should remember that it's important to balance that focus on communities, not just geographically, but in terms of communities of interest. So Forum Central, as part of the COVID response, working with the council and the NHS partners, established a community of interest network. So what we mean by that is groups of people who share an identity, so for example, a learning disability, or who share an experience, so for example, the homeless community. And this again is about how we play to our strengths of organisations that support particular communities of interest, then collaborating through the anchor networks, the system, through the ecosystems at a local grassroots level that the community anchors support, to make sure that we're bringing in all of the additional support or reaching communities and people in the way that's most relevant for them. So for some of them, that may not necessarily be through a geographical area, it might be through that community of interest. And that's particularly important given the importance of the overlap between those identities, particularly as a lot of those groups experience the most extreme disadvantage and isolation. Thanks.
Thank you. Sam Powell.
Press the wrong button then. Thank you, Councillor Anderson. I just wanted to raise, or just to mention something that can be quite practical in navigating the funding landscape. So we do have the Funding Lead platform that supports bringing together all the funding information, really accessible, and it's about to be redeveloped to make it easier. So we'll be helping organisations understand more about that. And Val also do a number of funding fairs, making funding accessible, training for organisations to understand how to navigate that, and also build partnerships in the room. And I think those things are really valued by the sector in navigating what can be quite challenging, especially for smaller organisations.
Thank you. Nadine?
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. I just thought I'd come in and just give a really practical example of what Hannah's alluded to in terms of the community anchor network, and also relates to Councillor Cunningham's point around ensuring that whatever we deliver aren't constrained by geographical boundaries and postcodes and so forth. And we're working with a particular care network, one that actually Councillor Tudor's referenced, We Are Seacroft, to looking at issues around extremism in a particular part of city where we know extremism actually has no boundaries and no geography. So although we are trying to address a certain issue in a certain community, we are working with a wider cohort of organisations through that network, really, which is a partnership between statutory and community partners to address a really difficult issue that I think has the potential to spread throughout Leeds and so forth. So we've been doing that work for a considerable amount of time, and I certainly think it's really useful having community anchor networks in the way that Hannah has described, really, to help us deliver some of our statutory obligations as well.
That's right. Now, Councillor Tudor, is your question in respect of this issue, or is it a new issue? You're muted.
Same issue.
It's a new issue.
Same issue.
Same issue. You come in then.
Yeah, it's a very quick point to echo Councillor Cunningham and others that ward-based funding, you know, the need is the need doesn't respect boundaries. So we've got people right on the edge of the ward. The neighbouring ward got funding for their food bank, food pantry, and so when people turned up across the road, turned up from our ward, they were turned away because they had the wrong postcode. So to the resident, that is very unfair, and there was a bit of unhappiness about that. We've come to a solution now, but whether it's food or youth services or whatever it is, boundaries, people don't see the boundaries. You know, the good thing is often just over the ward boundary, and I think in this wider conversation, that's something that really can be, you know, there are financial limits to what services people on the ground, these organisations that are doing great work, that limitations we are putting on them, that is actually really hampering them and making things difficult for them.
Yep, that's fine. Thank you. Mr. Hollands?
Thank you. I just wanted to add with regard to funding that as part of the development of a third sector strategy, we will be looking at the inward investment strategy to try and further enhance money that comes into Leeds from outside Leeds, particularly from organisations that providing grants that come into Leeds. There's a lot of capacity for increasing on that. That we estimated at the moment that every pound that is spent in Leeds by organisations in Leeds is matched by about 3.9 times that by incoming generation from a number of different areas, from grant aid, from fundraising, and we think that we can strengthen that work even further. So that will be an important part of developing third sector strategy.
Thank you. All right. Now, Councillor Thompson, it's your chance now.
So first of all, just to say thank you for the Forum Central event yesterday in the museum, which brought together lots of organisations. It was great to see them linking up with each other for the first time in a few years in that setting. The question kind of follows on from the previous one, and I think Sam has already got, and others have gone some way towards answering it, in fact. How can we as a local authority work with the third sector to help level out the peaks and the troughs of the way that funding so often works? That means people are on short-term contracts, that you don't know past a year how much funding you have. Are there ways that we can better coordinate that to support the organisations through it? Thank you.
Anybody like to follow on that one? Councillor Lee, do you want to come in just now? Well, Sandy?
No, I was going to put my hand up for other points after.
Another point, that's
answered.
fine. Okay, right. In that case, Mr. Hollands, I think, indicated he would like to come in.
Thank you. I just want, I think it's a really important point, trying to make sure the third sector is obviously used to dealing with funding coming on a year by year basis. What I hope that we don't do, though, as a result of consideration, I think we do need to give consideration to that question, but at the moment, about 75% of the money that comes from the Leeds local authority to the third sector comes in the form of contracts rather than grant aid. I would urge the local authority not to trying to increase contracting rather than grant aid. Grant aid is really, really important for those organisations, especially smaller organisations, to enable them to respond. So that flexibility that comes from grant aid rather than the more formal relationships that come through contracting are really important. So yeah, let's try to look at longer term funding, particularly funding that goes on from one year to the next, but let's not try to tie it up too much in a kind of formal system.
Okay, thank you. Hannah?
Yeah, I think just to add to that and to sort of respond to your question, Councillor Thompson, yeah, I mean, it's a perennial issue. And I think within the third sector, we recognise that certainly from a local government perspective, that often the funding that comes down to local government is also kind of short term. We've seen this a lot during COVID, much needed funds, but they did come in, 3 months, 6 months kind of tranches because of the kind of circumstances which we were operating in. But we see that sort of continuing now through the cost of living crisis, vital funds like the Household Support Fund, coming in sort of 6 monthly tranches. Obviously in the autumn statement, it was confirmed that there'd be another year of household support funds. So, we recognise that often the local authority are in a difficult position in this regard as well. And this is where, again, I think the work that will go on to develop the third sector strategy and the points that Chris has raised around, ensuring that gives a really good picture of the makeup of the sector, where the kind of funding comes from, to understand those kind of trends and to think about what we can do as a city to leverage in more investment into the sector, and really that system-wide approach to understand what are our priorities as a city, as a system, and how do the third sector play a key role in being able to attract investment that statutory partners can't. But I think there's some quite detailed work that we need to do as part of that strategy. So I think the local authorities support for that work to happen so that we can really understand that picture, and seek to set out a really clear investment strategy for the sector, for the city, as part of that wider piece of work.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson, do you want to come back in again?
No, thank you. That was all really helpful and much appreciated.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Lee.
I'm Barry here. Thank you. Echo what everybody else has said, really. First of all, thank you all for the immense and very important work that you do across all of the city. I've just got a couple of sort of questions, really. Sort of a philosophical one, really, to start with. In the very first paragraph of the statement of ambition, we talk about Leeds needing to be brave enough. Do our guests believe that as a city we are brave enough? Because my experience of our city council is that we're actually quite risk adverse, and to be brave normally requires some form of risk, and it's not something that in my 11 years as a councillor I've really identified this city as being. Secondly, if I could just ask about in the key findings from the 3 surveys last year, or that finished in September 21, has any further, that's 15 months ago, has any further surveys been done? Because we make reference to the cost of living crisis, and obviously we made reference to the pandemic and the impact. The reason I ask really is because many of the board will know that I'm an A&E nurse, and during the pandemic, all those silos that we talk about, and I can hear it in conversations that people are having on this report around collaboration. All of those silos that stopped collaboration fell away, and there was a common purpose. Now the urgency of the pandemic has passed, those silos have returned, certainly in my A&E. So I just want to sort of get a feel whether our guests feel that, and I guess you've already, whether silos are still a problem, and silos within the council, because we often as elected members note silos in the council between different departments. And finally, whoever thought up communities of interest, kudos. It's not a term I'd heard before. I actually quite like it to describe those multi-ward based interest groups, because we're right. We obviously, as elected members, fixate on our own wards without recognising that they are very diverse communities of interest within that one ward. So funding around communities of interest as well as ward-based initiatives, I'm fully in favour of. And just finally, thank you for all that you do.
And what I'll do is I'll give all our guests an opportunity. So the questions are, do you think we are a brave, risk-taking council? And secondly, what's your views on silos? So Hannah, I'll start with you first of all.
Great, thanks Councillor Anderson and Councillor Lay for those questions. I'll sort of take them in turn. So are we brave as a city, and I guess particularly from a local authority context? I would say yes. And I think during the pandemic that was demonstrated. You know, speaking from the perspective of Voluntary Action Leeds and the setup of the community care hub network, that was done in a matter of days. That was, I think, a brave move by the local authority, but an absolutely essential move. But we were taking a bit of a leap into the unknown. It paid off. It started off fairly top down because of the circumstances. And over the couple of years it was in operation, it did really evolve and it became much more kind of community, grassroots, you know, bottom up, if you like. So I think generally speaking, yes. But I guess the local authority is a large organisation. And as we return to more sort of business as usual, and that immediate priority and the urgency of the pandemic, you know, is gone, then inevitably there will be certain parts of the local authority that are kind of more risk averse, and for good reasons. You know, colleagues in procurement and legal have to keep the local authority on the straight and narrow. So I guess we need to kind of balance those things. In terms of sort of that common purpose question and silo working, I guess it's sort of related, but I think from a sector perspective, one of the things that, you know, there's a real appetite to continue that the work that happened during COVID in terms of, you know, getting rid of those silos, getting rid of the kind of emphasis on competition, focusing on collaboration. So I think there is a really concerted effort within the sector to try and ensure that we continue with that kind of common purpose, which, although the threat of COVID has receded, we've got the common purpose of supporting communities through the cost of living crisis. So I think that endures. And then in terms of sort of further surveys, following on from the third sector resilience work that happened, obviously we've already made reference to the state of the sector report and research that Forum Central led last year. And obviously we're going to be refreshing that work over the coming months. And I'm sure Francesca will talk about some work that Forum Central have done with their membership in particular to understand, you know, the impact that the current crisis is having on organisations. So I'll leave it there and pass on to others.
Thank you. Chris, do you want to come in?
Thank you, I will. Just on silos, I think it's fairly inevitable in the city where you've got a large third sector, 3,500 organisations, but also the local authority itself is one of the largest in the country. So it's fairly inevitable that you're going to get specialisms which develop. And one of the most important of those is around health. There are loads of ways in which the different parts of the third sector relate to different parts of the local authority. But there are also some very long established partnerships and means of communication. And one of the most important and effective of those is the Third Sector Partnership Group, which Councillor Harland chairs. And I think that it would be helpful if that could be seen as being the focus by which the relationships between the third sector and the local authority, if it was seen that that is always the case, where it doesn't need to control everything, but it's seen as being the means of which communication is focused. And there's perhaps more that could be done in those areas. And one of the things which is happening at the moment is because of the development of WICA and sort of new relationships are establishing, that is not necessarily focusing on the existing relationships there are in the third sector. Very strong relationships with communities and neighbourhoods. But WICA has got other fish to fry. So it's looking at the economy, it's looking at education, and there are other relationships there which are sometimes overlook the fact that there are already existing patterns of communication which are there in the third sector, which I think could be used even better than they already are. So,
thank you. Francesca.
Thanks, Councillor. In terms of the city being brave enough, I think if we're comparing to other local authorities, we probably are braver and bolder. Certainly that's the feedback we get when we talk to counterparts in other local authorities. But this is about our own ambition as a city, and I think, you know, we want to be brave, we want to be bolder, and I think we should be pushing further to do that. So I'd absolutely support. You know, there are opportunities for us to do more of that. A lot of that is about behaviour change, and I think in terms of our culture, our organisational culture, but our systems thinking culture, I think that has changed as a result of COVID. I think we've seen really what we can do collectively, and I hope that's given us the strength of belief that actually this is the right way for us to work, and it's the only way we're going to overcome problems, but also not just overcome and endure, but actually make life better for our people and communities. So I would say that we should absolutely be being even braver than we already are. And I would say the third sector is the opportunity to mitigate some of the risks. You're a statutory organisation, you're a large organisation. We are a collection and collaboration of much nimbler organisations. We already exist where we have to take risks. And so I'm not saying put all the risk on us, but I am saying use that capacity that we have as system partners so that we are testing out things faster, that we are getting back feedback quicker, that we are making improvements more nimbly, rather than, well, you know, we'll do a year's work on that, we'll assess that, and then we'll slowly see what's happening at the end of that, by which time the world will have changed again on us. So that sort of continuous improvement as a way to push for being bolder, I would absolutely support. In terms of the silos, I would again say third sector organisations are people focused, we're community focused. We look at the whole needs that are going to make things better for that person or that community, which means we naturally will tie together services and resources across statutory partners, across your directorates, across health directorates, and particularly for communities of interest where those health inequalities and social inequalities are so intertwined and complex. So again, use us, work with us, and use us in the nicest possible sense to make sure that we are capitalising on the strength that we have to join up that work and make it make sense for people and communities at a grassroots level.
Thank you. Okay, Sandy, do you want to come back again?
No, just to thank them all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Right. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to invite Mr. Money to summarise what he's heard today, and then I'll give the last word to Councillor Harland, and then we'll move on from this agenda. So Mr. Money first, and then Councillor Harland.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. Yeah, I think what's coming across here particularly strongly is the is recognition that there's a significant challenge in front of us. Kind of a multi-dimensional challenge, particularly when you think about cost of living. And COVID was challenging enough, wasn't it? But I think there are a number of threats, some of which have been sort of referenced in the questions and in the discussion today, linked to the work that we're keen to do with the third sector, and of course are keen to do together to support communities and people and families across the city. I think the reference that Chris made to trust. And Chris made it, I think, in the context of the relationship between the sector and the local authority. That's what I think Chris was alluding to at that point. I think that's really important in terms of partnership working and being as transparent as we can with the way that we need to work through this this next period of time. And I think also we acknowledge that. From a local authority point of view, there is something about public money and cost here, but there's something much more significant in terms of value, the value that's being delivered through appropriate use of funding and support. And we've got some arrangements in place, I think, to continue to keep those key fundamentals, trust and value in the work that we do at the heart of the work as we kind of move forwards. I think the comment that was just made there by Councillor Lay, I think it was around silos and organisational structures. I think that's a fair point, to be honest, Councillor Anderson. I think the trick for us, and it involves all of us in terms of the conversation today and others, is the leadership challenge here about making sure that structures around certain things are critical, particularly in big organisations. But what they shouldn't do is lead to suboptimal service delivery to communities in need in the city. And we're as charged up as we can be, I think, from a leadership point of view, in making sure that we navigate that critical journey through these difficult times. Probably a little bit more than a summing up there, Councillor Anderson. Hopefully that's helpful.
That's fine. That's not a problem. Councillor Harland.
Follow all that. I think it's all been said. What I will say is, as a relatively new chair of the Third Sector Partnership, I do feel that it has got the right people around the right table, and I do think it's a really good forum for that communication, two-way communication as well. We are at the beginning of this new strategy, and as I said a minute ago, I do think the right people are around the right tables to be discussing this and moving it forward. Yes, we've got some challenges, but let's not just talk about the Third Sector Partnership. It's vital that we really make that work, and I think we're all on the same page with that one. Yes, there'll be financial challenges, but the fundamental basics of this is the people of our city in those areas that need our help. And the third sector often deal with the people that would never ever come to the council for help. So yes, we've got some work to do, but looking forward to that work. Sam's relatively new for looking at after the Third Sector Partnership. I know that she's keen. All officers, Paul, Nadine, are so keen to make this work, and we'll do it together because we have to.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harland. So, as far as the board, what we were asked to do was to determine whether we support the series of actions. Well, I've not heard anybody making any undue adverse comments, so we will take it as read that you do support the actions that were set out under the four headings in Appendix 4 on page 20. So can I thank our guests, Hannah Bailey, Chris Hollins and Francesca Wood for coming along here today. Thank you for your contributions, and because this is an important part for us. You are welcome to stay in the call if you want to find out about the paper that Paul tantalised you with, so that you can see how it all fits together. But thank you all very much for coming along today. So on that, if we can now move on to item 4, which is tackling inequality and disadvantage in communities, localities. So the people who are speaking in this one, we've got Councillor Harland, you've already met, Mr. Money, you've already met. So Liz Jarman, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Morning everyone. It's Liz Jarman, Head of Locality Partnerships.
Thank you. Now, is Andrew Birkbeck in the call?
I am, Chair. Yeah, Andy Birkbeck, Localities Programme Manager in the Safer Stronger Communities team.
Taj Verdi?
Morning everyone. It's Taj Verdi, Localities Programme Manager, Safer Stronger Communities.
Thank you. Rachel Marshall?
Councillor Anderson, just to mention that Rachel did have an in-person meeting she had to attend and said she may arrive a little bit late, so she'll probably join us at some point towards the end of the presentation.
That's fine. Thank you. Stuart Byrne?
Hi, morning all. Stuart Byrne, Localities Programme Manager with the Safe Stronger Communities team.
And last but by no means least, Jane Patterson.
Morning everyone, Jane Patterson, Programme Manager in the Communities team.
Thank you. Okay, so if Liz, if you can give some introductory remarks introducing the paper, and I got a message to say that you've got a presentation for us as well, which is fine, and then I'll invite Councillor Harland to say a few words, and then we'll go through some headlines that the locality managers want to bring to our attention from their respective areas. So over to you, Liz.
As Scrutiny is aware, we come to you every year to give you an update on where we are with the locality working programme. So this is our annual update to you all. So hopefully we can enlighten you in terms of the work that's been taking place since, really since the end of COVID, when the team got back to business as usual in terms of accelerating our approach to how we tackle inequality and poverty in our most deprived areas, and that's largely around the focus on the 1% areas that occupy the city. I'm just going to talk you through a presentation shortly to outline some of the progress that we've made, and also to set out how we're planning to work with Scrutiny and our other partners, including the third sector, moving forward. So I'll leave it there, Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. Councillor Harland?
Just to reiterate what Liz has said, this is the annual update. This board has had overview of this for a long time. When I was on the board many years ago, when this first started, it really has progressed and made a difference to people out in those communities. But as always, value the opinion of members, and over to Liz for the presentation, I would say.
That's fine, thank you. Right, so Andrew Birkbeck, is there any, do you want to highlight anything particular in your area you want to bring to our attention?
Not at this stage, Councillor Anderson. I think Liz is just going to go through the presentation, and then I think we'll throw it over, and then any questions we'll
right, and so presumably the rest would apply as well. So if we just pass back to you, Liz, and you can then give us the presentation.
Yeah.
You're muted, Liz.
I'm just going to attempt to load my screen onto the computer.
So far, so good. If you can press the enlarge slide, because it's only down in one small slide just now. So if you can enlarge it, that's it.
Is that okay? Does everybody can see it?
Yeah,
right.
Thank you.
Okay. Right, lovely. So I'm just going to start by giving you a bit of an overview in terms of a stock take, shall we say, of where we are So as you'll all know, up until in 2017, we sought to develop a different way of working, which run as a proof of concept up until earlier this year, where we took a report to Executive Board setting out the progress that had been made in improving some of those areas. And that was evident, I should add, by the fact that some of the areas that had been identified in the 2015 indices of multiple deprivation that were 1% areas had actually lifted out of that 1% area. Those 1% areas, not massively, I should add, but certainly demonstrated that by working differently and more collegiately in those areas that are struggling the greatest, that we can really make some inroads in terms of addressing those issues. So on the back of that report to Executive Board in March, there was an agreement that we would extend the locality working approach to all 12 1% areas. So the 2019 indices of multiple deprivation actually indicated to us that we'd moved from having, I believe it was off the top of my head, 16 areas in the 1% most deprived areas to 12. So the Executive Board supported that we moved to cover all those areas, and that's really where we've been focusing over the last 6 months or so. Alongside that, we agreed that we would develop local area plans, which we're currently in train with. We're just at the point of looking at start to co-produce those, so I'll go into that a little bit more detail further into the presentation. But also continuing our work to drive forward that whole system approach in terms of how we can work together in collaboration with all our key sectors that are relevant to locality working to improve our most deprived neighbourhoods. Alongside of that work, Shahid, just before he left, Shahid Mahmood, our former chief officer, also did a review around communities which sought to look at how some of the learning from the locality approaches could be built upon. And that slide to the right-hand side just depicts those 4 areas that it focused on. And some of the focus areas it would be agreed that we'd concentrate on and would fall into the locality working programme was around children and young people, community entrepreneurship and health and well-being. So probably no real surprises. And actually in terms of the community entrepreneurship element, that is still in development, but I think the previous conversation in regards to the third sector is particularly pertinent because our third sector is incredibly entrepreneurial, and we really need to look at how we support and grow that entrepreneurial across all our city in a much more focused and developed manner. In terms of the community entrepreneurship element, that is still in development, but I think the previous conversation in regards to the third sector is particularly pertinent because our third sector is incredibly entrepreneurial, and we really need to look at how we support and grow that entrepreneurial across all our city in a much more focused and apologies everybody, I'm getting feedback from my computer. I thought that somebody else was speaking to me.
It's okay. It looks as though it's the host is the only person who isn't muted at the moment. So I've just sent a message through to Becky to see if we can get the host to mute themselves.
All right, lovely. Thank you. Right, I'll plough on. So just to feedback that we, as you'll all be aware, we did have a really intense assessment by the LGA in February time, October-February time, and that really did highlight, and it was given in feedback from Tom to staff and to members around how we do have a really good, we have all the right components for a great locality-based system, but there is work to do to both bring that together and also to accelerate it, I think is one of the key issues that was raised. And that we've done a lot of work, and there was a real acknowledge that we have the real buy-in of local community organisations, particularly our third sector partners on this. And again, that last point around partnership work is seen as our strength. And I suppose just to emphasise yet again some of the discussions that happened in the previous report, that we see our third sector as absolutely being fundamental to the way that we deliver services, not just in our most deprived communities but across the whole of the city. I think the comment was made by Councillor Harland that quite often, as much as we try to be a trusted organisation, a lot of people won't come to us because of various different issues and life factors. So our third sector are not only absolutely astounding professionals in their own fields, but also really trusted partners, and partners that sometimes are able to reach out to those parts of the community that sometimes we can't. So that's absolutely fundamental in terms of our way forward. So you'll have seen this model before, but in it will contain lots of information about how our service from a community's perspective work at that universal level, in that more targeted level in terms of our most deprived areas, and the seasonal responsive work. And you'll probably all seen some of that in some way or another just recently throughout the Halloween and bonfire period, where thankfully, other than some small unexpected uprisings in some small parts of the city largely went through bonfire night with very low disturbances, and reports from the fire service and indeed our police colleagues suggest that they definitely see a downturn in terms of the number of calls for service, and Leeds is seen as the front runner at West Yorkshire level in terms of how we deal with some of those pinch points that we see happening every year at certain times out the year. So what we're trying to do now is we're in discussions with all our key services that operate in localities to look at what this citywide targeted and seasonal responsive model looks like. And we're actually holding a workshop later this month with key partners, including our third sector partners and the anchor organisations that sit within the 6 priority wards, to really start to unpick what for their services and their organisation that approach means to them, and how we start to bring some of that, bring some of our tactical approaches together in a much more coherent way at a locality level. Some recurring themes across each of the across all of the city for different reasons is you will all be aware cost of living is absolutely a top priority for us all at this moment. Health inequalities, life expectancy, crime and antisocial behaviour, low educational attainment, skills and employment, and housing environment. And what we're trying to do from a locality perspective is look as I think one of my the speakers from the previous presentation mentioned, was really try to focus not just on how we are responsive in terms of those issues, but how we work across the wider determinants, and much more in the preventative element of delivery, to try and stop us getting to the point where we're at crisis point, which we all know places huge demands on services for all different reasons, resources and otherwise, but are actually really difficult for us to recover from, take far longer. So if we can work in that preventative and early intervention space, then we're much more likely to have much more resilient communities and much better use of an efficient use of our local resources. Key to our locality working approach is our community committees. They are our main democratic infrastructure in terms of the way that we engage with our local communities. I would say that we're probably not making as much as we could of that infrastructure, so we really want to deliver a much more focused approach around how we work with our community committees and how our community committees engage with their local communities. So we are we've been looking for some time at the role of community committee champions, and in the new year we'll start in earnest to really look at how we can make that role much more focused and much more targeted in terms of the areas where it would be best deliver best effect in terms of their time and effort that we know many elected members put into that role. Delivery of the youth summits. We are in the midst of a programme of youth summits at the moment. I think we've delivered 3 so far, where we've engaged with over 1,000 young people. So how do we make sure that we use that information much more effectively in terms of what young people want to see in their local communities, and what young people can also be a part of and deliver in terms of their own civic responsibilities. We're about to launch a priority setting framework, which will come out to all the committees early next year, probably at the end or just at the beginning of the new municipal year, which will really set out what some of the presenting issues are in those areas from a data perspective, but also from a local intelligence perspective, so that committees can start to really think about what's important to them and what they need to use their time, effort and resources to best effect and to affect change. And I mentioned at the onset, we really want to have a focus around how we increase in community engagement and making the community committee discussions pertinent to local people, because that's how we're going to get people engaged. If we feel that the discussions and the reports that are being taken there are relevant to them and their lives. Just in terms of the targeted work that we're doing through the sort of the 6 priority wards, that just depicts the 6 priority wards that we're focusing on. Is Hunslet and Riverside, Killenbeck and Seacroft, Beeston and Holbeck, Armley, Bermontos and Richmond Hill, and Gibson Harehills. And if I can just draw your attention to the report in Appendix 1, you will find a more detailed breakdown of what some of the presenting issues are in each of those areas. So that makes for some quite interesting reading, and obviously lots of work going on to try and look at how we bring all that information together as part of the local area plan approach. In terms of governance, we still are working to the Neighbourhood Improvement Board, and you'll see Scrutiny is mentioned at the top in terms of our strategic approach from a corporate level. So very much about how we support the delivery of the best city ambition at a local level, and how we bring all those plans and strategies that are relevant to localities to life in those 6 wards. But I should add that what we want to try and do, although our focus is on those 6 wards, we very much want to take the learning that we have, that we get from working differently in those wards across the wider city, where the issues are, where there's issues that are presenting elsewhere that are relevant, and we can demonstrate that a different way of working in one area could be adopted and used elsewhere. And very much want to look at how we use Scrutiny. I know a previous recommendation that was made was that that there were elements of the locality working programme that would sit across each of the Scrutiny boards. What we're trying to do now is look at those local area plans, and once those are agreed and ratified, is that the relevant actions for the relevant Scrutiny boards would then sit in their work programmes moving forward. So that's where we are in terms of looking at how we can engage the broader Scrutiny work programme. We've also recently set up a locality working delivery group, which will sit in between the NIB and the core groups that will operate within those 6 priority wards. We had the inaugural meeting earlier this month. We've got a workshop session middle of this month, and that's really going to start to look at how we develop the local area plans, and what are the, across the different strategies that operate at a city level, what are the ones that are pertinent for us to focus on at a locality level, and how can we look at our individual roles in terms of what we deliver in those areas, from not just statutory services but the third sector, Hannah's involved, and also the anchor networks that operate in those areas, how we can really think about those broader determinants that we can work on together to bring about some real change and some real improvement to the lives of the people that live in those areas. That group will also be looking at how we can better collaborate, and also that point around learning and sharing a good practice, so making sure that where we know that something works, how do we make sure that that can be adopted elsewhere and put to best effect. Next slide. So the local area plans, just to give you an idea what they're going to look like, they will include some information around the demographics of the area and some of the presenting issues. But I suppose the main element of it will be looking at how we've got, looking at those locality relevant strategies that have a relevant locality focus, and distill those into one cohesive plan, which we can work on collegiately over a period of time, and that's probably going to be between 3 and 5 years that we're looking at, with an annual refresh taking place as well. So our timetable for implementation. So our journey started in March this year when Executive Board approved the new locality working approach. We've done a lot of work in the meantime to reshape the way that my team works. So some of you will be aware that you've now got a programme manager that's linked into your community committee area. So we've sort of changed the structure, so that took a little bit of time, but we're now that's now operational and working really well. We're aiming to actually have the local area plans, I'll just jump straight to the end, finalised by mid-year next year. So they'll be, they won't be public documents in the first instance, because we want to make sure that we know what we're asking the public, what they mean to the public before we start sharing them with them. But they will be hopefully supported and in place by June next year, so we can start delivery around those areas that we've agreed that we'll all work together on. So I'll stop there, Councillor Anderson.
Thank you very much. Right. Is any of the officers got anything they would want to add at this stage before I open it up to members? Right. In that case, Councillor Cunningham, you are first.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Liz, for the report, which I've read, including the appendix. One of the things that I note in the report is that there is no mention of volunteer time. And I think that in my community in particular, that is very underestimated. So I refer to Appendix 1. I see, and here I will declare my non-pecuniary interest in Armley Action Team and most of the other associated working groups on the volunteer front in Armley. But I note that Armley Action Team is listed under the Armley Ward actions. See, I think there it should be made clear that Armley Action Team is in fact a volunteer group, not a third sector organisation. And within that there have been quite a number of issues surrounding things like voluntary sector groups accessing funding on time, their applications being faced with perhaps more criticism than organised third sector groups. And speaking with knowledge of the Armley Action Team, I've already fed this back centrally, but there's a great feeling amongst many of the volunteer groups within Armley that they are underappreciated for the work that they do to support things. And based on that, there are questions on whether some of these volunteer groups will be able to go ahead and carry on with the events that they have been producing in Armley. So I think that's something that really needs highlighting in the report, that the work of the volunteers, and that goes for things like Friends of Armley and Gotts Park, for example, who now oversee flower beds that would have been filled in Armley Park. And just a point of note, the Armley Town Team no longer does exist. That was a business group for Armley Town Street, but it's no longer in place. Okay, thank you.
Right, now, I don't, of the locality, the managers, the locality programme managers, I'm not that up to date as to which one covers the Armley area. Who is it that actually covers the Armley area?
It's myself, Councillor Anderson, Taj. Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to come back in on that?
I think it's all a very fair point. I know the issues that have been referred to, and we are sort of trying to build those relationships up, particularly with Armley Action Team, so we can actually plan longer term what support they need to make sure they're not in that position again where funding becomes an issue or it takes too long. So I absolutely agree with what Councillor Cunningham said. So it's learning for us.
That's fine, thank you. Right, any other members got any questions? Councillor Tudor.
Yeah, something I've just thought of. I feel very lucky to be in a ward where the three members speak constantly and work together extremely well and closely. And I don't believe that in some of the awards in the city that happens. And while we're sitting here talking about how can local government do their best with the third sector and their ward generally, closer collaboration between members of the three members in each ward would be so valuable. I know in some areas it doesn't happen. I'm very lucky in mine that it does, but I think that's a bit of an elephant in the room in this conversation this morning, that how transformative that could be.
Anybody want to raise hands to come back on that point?
I'll just say that no, all of our community committees are unique. They have some guiding principles, but they all operate differently. And I think that they are all really hard working in terms of the needs of their communities, but they do have differences of opinion. But I think largely we do manage to come to consensus around issues, and where we can, then we refer them to the appropriate policy to make sure that those issues are dealt with. But I would say that I work with all 99 councillors, and my team probably have the most contact with councillors than any other team in the whole of the council, both at an executive level and at a local level. And I'm incredibly proud of the work that councillors do. It's that our councillors are really committed, and I hope that those issues of where the councillors don't see eye to eye are largely resolved in a way that's professional and appropriate, and that I don't see it presenting massive issues on a recurrent basis.
Okay,
which is a good thing.
Yeah, Councillor Tudor.
Yeah, I do accept that response. I think that's sensible and knowledgeable and fair. So yeah, I do accept that. I just to reiterate, I think there are opportunities for councillors to work better together in some wards. Not really, I didn't really mean about community committees. I just meant the fact, of just general collaboration.
That's fine. Now, Councillor Cunningham, is that a legacy hand or is it on the same issue?
It's not, Chair. It's I don't feel that I got a response about how the volunteer time would be accounted for, within the locality project. Thank you.
Liz, Taj.
Yeah, I'll come back on that one. Councillor Cunningham, we do have those figures. I apologise that they're not in the report. It's an oversight on our part. We certainly published them in the annual report that recently went to full council. So we do have those figures, and it's an oversight on our part. So apologies for that.
Okay, right. I've got Councillor Liz. Are you happy with that, Councillor Cunningham?
Thanks for checking, Chair. I am.
Yeah. Right, I've got Councillor Smith, then Councillor Walshaw. So Councillor Smith first, then Councillor Walshaw.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to say thank you for a great report and again some excellent work. In terms of the priority neighbourhoods, I wondered whether there was any scope. Obviously, not until we've kind of solved a few more issues in these priority neighbourhoods, shall I say, but at some point to expanding that, because I think there is need, pockets of need all around the city, and I do think that we do need to focus slightly wider in our net. I mean, some of the issues could literally be poor transport, as we see often in the sort of the north end of the city, and in my own ward, I do have a priority section of my own ward, which I try to focus on greatly, and I just wondered whether that would be any scope for that in the future, please. Thank you.
Who wants to deal with that one? Liz?
I can come back on that. I think our approach, Councillor Smith, is, as I've said, is that we're focusing on these areas because these are the wards where the 12 1% areas reside in the city. But we very much want to, as I said in the presentation, take the learning. So if we have got issues that in those areas where we've adopted a different way of working, and we have similar issues in pockets of the city that are perhaps not presenting in quite the same way from a deprivation perspective, then we would be seeking to look at how we could adopt those ways of working in those areas. So I think it's work in practice. Obviously, we review our approach to locality working on a regular basis. So I'm hopeful that although we won't be looking to expand beyond those 6 wards, because that's what's been agreed, we'll focus on, at least for the foreseeable future, is that where there are those issues, we can take the learning and look at how we can support those areas using the good practice that we developed elsewhere. I suppose that my challenge back to you, Councillor Smith, would be if you let us know what those issues are in those areas, and we can, through your committee structures, we can make sure that we're cognizant of them, so that if we do have things that we can, or some learning or some areas of business that we could start to bring to the community committee meeting as something that you may want to support through your wellbeing funds, for example, then we'll do our best to support it in that way through the current iteration of the programme.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm particularly thinking of my area of Swinner, and we have a community centre there which is council owned and volunteer run, and they struggle with funding. I mean, we fund them greatly through various things. I've got them tens of thousands of pounds of funding over my term, but I do think we need a better approach with them. So I'll take it up separately, but I think that's where I'm coming from mostly. Thank you.
Yeah. Right. I've got Councillor Walshaw, and then I've got Councillor Graham, and then
thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yes, very interesting couple of reports. Very comprehensive about the amount of work going on across the city. I mean, if anyone's watching the Scrutiny board, would leave in no doubt that the breadth and depth of efforts that have gone on with both the council and the voluntary sector. I don't certainly recognise anything I've seen over the last few years as this council being risk averse, Chair. Not quite sure where that comment came from. I come at this question in the interest of full disclosure. Some folk know I co-chair the Cardigan Community Centre as a trustee, and we've been busy putting together, along with other organisations in my ward of Henley and Hyde Park, but across in the northwest, because I'm also the community committee chair, we've been putting together our cost of living responses, and it's not perhaps a question that the officers could get and Councillor Harlan could give now, and I'm happy for it to come at a later point. But how are we going to maximise the reach of the offer? Because there's a lot going on, and people are putting amazing efforts in, but nothing fills me with more dread than when a public sector organisation says, "Yeah, we're going to put messages out on our socials." Because we don't have the biggest reach in the world, despite our best efforts. So I'm wondering, what are people's thoughts on how we can maximise that? Are we going to perhaps try to bring in some economies of scale and coordinate that? For example, things as simple as individual leaflets, but bulk buying on scale. Are we going to use directly use either the voluntary sector or council staff for leaflet distribution, that kind of thing? Or are we going to bulk buy in paid for deliveries? The reason I ask all of this is just on a practical basis. We do a lot of food bank collection drives, and when we use our, if you like, just our socials in sort of Headingley and Hyde Park, it's okay to a point. But whenever we use just the basic old-fashioned leaflet, it's the donations go up by about 2/3, Chair. Or to put it in practical terms, 3 loads of my Vauxhall Zephyra stuff full of donations, as opposed to 5 to 6 Vauxhall Zephyras of donations, if you want to put it in a simple graphical term, Chair. And I'm just wondering what are people's thoughts on that at the moment, because on my patch, we're thinking that we're going to have we're preparing for sort of an avalanche of need in sort of January, February period, March period, that's when the cost of living crisis we think will really hit home in the city, when people have started to get their next quarter energy bills, and then they've had to, maybe it's the festive season and people spend money then. So I mean, what are the practical steps we can take? And if this requires an answer later on, Chair, that's absolutely fine, because I appreciate it's quite a question, it's quite broad ranging. Thanks.
Right, Liz, or the local program manager, do either of you want to come in?
It would be helpful if we could take this one away and come back and speak to our colleagues who are leading on the wide approach, if in all honesty.
That's completely fine. Yeah, absolutely.
That's fine. Right.
Councillor Anderson, I could just chip in. It's Jay.
Yes.
Just as a small example, in Holbeck, we do have a little bit of what Councillor Walshaw just described there. So we have as a response to issues in regards to on-street sex work in Holbeck, we do have a partnership group that obviously deals with lots of things, but one of the things we've been doing recently is engaging with residents, particularly in the recreations, the 1% area, and engaging with them through leaflet drops. So every couple of months we do a leaflet drop, and so one month it might be for a Safer Leeds update, it might be an antisocial behaviour update, it might be a third sector support services update. But we all come together to deliver those leaflets. So we might have about 16, 20 people one Friday morning, and we blitz the whole area. So we do that sort of thing. It does work. And yeah, we get in terms of economies of scale, we get the best deal on producing the leaflets and newsletters. But yeah, services will come together and do that sort of work.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I don't know how to get the hand up.
Okay.
Can never work. Apologies for being late, but I couldn't get it onto the system. It's just a comment, really. And I think as regarding ward members and getting on or not, that's not what we're here for. We're here and elected to deliver for our constituents. And as regarding the community committees and Scrutiny, Liz and Beth, their teams do a fantastic job of supporting us so that we deliver for our residents in Leeds, and that's what it's all about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Tudor?
Yes, well, now, three things. Not disputing any of those things, just saying that the more collaboration between members, the better in terms of vision for the ward. That's all. Point two, to recognise that in terms of local authority work, deprived, disadvantaged areas such as this, such as Seacroft, Vermontoft, we're spending a lot of money on Leeds watch cameras that in some other wards, you know, we encounter costs because of things like Leeds watch that perhaps aren't paid for in other areas. And I don't know, it might be compensated for, but it might not. And lastly, about Councillor Warshaw's excellent comment, that locally we are Seacroft Collective, first week of January, will be delivering 10,000 leaflets about cost of living via Royal Mail door to door, and they're also delivering 7,000 leaflets to schools. So yeah, social media is not the answer to everything.
Okay, right. Anybody get any other questions? Okay, right. So I gave the opportunity earlier on, but the locality programme managers said to wait until the presentation. Now that you've heard the discussion, do any of you want to come in to set out what's been working well in your area, or anything you want to bring to Scrutiny's attention? Or do you feel that Liz has explained everything? Andy, you've taken your mute off. Does that suggest that you are happy to say something?
Thanks, Chair. Just a general comment, really, just because I think most of us have sat through the excellent first paper and presentation that was done around the third sector. And it was just a general comment, really, around locality working and the seeds that were sown right from 2017, really. I think with the hub response and the crisis response, which was a fantastic collaborative effort, that happened for loads of different reasons, but partly because some of those local relationships were forged because of that focus on place. And I think some of the maturity of the relationships with the third sector started sort of in 2017 and obviously before then. But people working in collaboration, and then when the crisis did hit, people were able to activate in a matter of days, as I think Hannah said, and get things set up quite quickly. And I think that's sometimes the nature of locality working. There's obviously quick wins, which we talk about, and we can talk about as we go forward. But I think sometimes it's the more long-term cultural change of people working to place, people working in collaboration, people working to citizen-led agendas. And it was just that. It seemed to, as I think, again, as Paul said, it all ties together as a golden thread, really, which is if, you know, you solidify those relationships, you start that sort of spirit de corps and everybody working to a sense of purpose and common purpose, that when we do get these crises, whether it be COVID or more recently the cost of living crisis, we can activate better. So I think that's just something to bear in mind when we talk about locality working. It's an ongoing journey, but the benefits really do get realised when the pressure's on as a council. That was all, Chair.
That's fine. Rachel?
Yeah, very briefly, thank you, Chair. So I'm the Locality Programme Manager for Killingbeck and Seacroft. As Councillor Tudor has alluded to, the We Are Seacroft Collective has grown out of that COVID response that Andy has just mentioned, how organisations came together to deliver around the anchor organisation and then have created a long-term sustainable partnership, which is the really interesting work for me going forward about how we work with that partnership to deliver the local area plans that we've talked to, that Liz mentioned in the presentation, and also about sort of innovative work going forward. So sorry I was late to the start of the meeting, but we've been meeting with representatives from Lille Council and Arts Collective there to talk about how we might do some partnership working with them next year to link in with the City of Culture. So I think there's great opportunities that come out of the locality working agenda, and how we make best use of those is really up to us and our third sector partners and members coming together to talk about it and find out the ways that we can really make a difference in the areas. So I'm quite excited about the future.
Thank you, Rachel. Right, doesn't look as anybody else indicating. So Liz, do you want to have a final comment, and then I'll pass over to Councillor Harland to sum up the session and any further comments she wants to make. Liz, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I just had to find the mute button. I think just to say thank you to Scrutiny really for the ongoing support that we've had from you all around this agenda, and I'm really hopeful that moving forward, as we start to get the nail down the local area plans and those local plans are developed, we can start to input input our actions and the actions of other services and organisations into the Scrutiny Board. So we'll have a much broader support mechanism around how we really start to drive forward and accelerate our work in those areas, and making sure that the really good work that's already started is shared across the wider city, because we know that when we do things well together, we really do make a big difference. And if we could just continue on that vine and really start to make sure that that learning is shared across other parts of the city, and indeed strengthen and continue to work with our amazing community committees, then I'm really excited for the next sort of 12 to 18 months, and really excited to work with you all more, both from a Scrutiny perspective and a community committee level.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson certainly knows what it's like working with the Outer North West Community Committee. That's an interesting thing in itself. So to sum up, Councillor Harland.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everybody for your input today. As Liz said, you know, this has been an ongoing journey, and your overview on this particular thing has been invaluable over the years, and hopefully that will continue. As Liz alluded to about the local area plans, once these are up and running, and we'd really like to embed that across the scrutinies and the different scrutiny boards. So any help with that, Councillor Anderson and Becky would be appreciated. There will be stuff that crosses over, so we'd really like your help with that. I've also got an ask about a working group. I know that sometimes members think, oh my God, not another. But Liz and I and Paul have spoken about the community committee and reviewing the community committees for quite some time, and it did come up in the peer review that these are the real vital, important, where members have a real feel for the local communities. So I would, if you could work it into your work programme, a working group on the community committee reviews, how we can do that would be really appreciated. I'd just like to say, for both of the teams that presented papers here, I'm really proud to work with these wonderful set of people and officers that are, you know, on the front line, sometimes in the front line or in between members and You know, that's not what they're there for. And I do think they handle things. And yes, you know, we do. I mentioned in council, people out there think that we should be working a little bit more collaboratively. But as members, we're all grown-ups, and that's incumbent on us to make sure that that happens when and where it can. But thank you again. If you could sneak those 2 asks in, then that would be great. I understand that you've got a busy schedule, but I do think that community committees can be the beacon out there, especially after how they stood up in the pandemic and what they're doing now. And of course, Chris is still here. I don't know if Hannah is, and Francesca. But that collaborative working is across the city, and it's incumbent on all of us to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Harland. Okay, right, so could I thank Councillor Harland, Mr Money, Liz Jarman, Andrew Birkbeck, Taj Verde, Rachel Marshall, Stuart Byrne and Jane Pattison for coming along to the meeting today. So, Becky, work schedule, item 5.
Hi, thanks, Chair. Yeah, if I can just draw members' attention to 3 dates. You've got your budget working group on the 12th of December. You've then got a social progress index working group on Wednesday, the 14th of December, and that's designed to provide a bit more context before your performance monitoring in January. And then finally, you've got a further working group just having gone into the diary for February on the Air Quality Action Plan. You should have received invitations to all of those, and all of those are being held remotely, but it's just to make sure that they're on your radar and you're aware of them.
Okay, so the next formal meeting we've got is on the 5th of January at 10:30 with a pre-meeting at 10 o'clock. But we've got the other 2 meetings that are coming up shortly, one on the budget and one on the social progress index. I don't know how many of you were actually, I know Councillor Tudor was at the SEAC meeting the other day where this social progress index was mentioned, which is very interesting as to what it's showing. And I think by their own admission, they would say that it's not necessarily finished yet. There's still some more work to be done, but the information that they're pulling out just now is very interesting in terms of where there might be gaps in delivery or the way that some residents are facing up to some of the problems that we've got in the city. So thank you all very much for your time and attention. It's very difficult. I've learned a lesson today not to try and chair a meeting using an iPad because I can only see 12 people at any one time. And it is very, very difficult to do it. But I've learned a lesson, so I'm letting everybody else know that the lesson I've learned today is to be careful as to how you chair a meeting. But thank you all very much, and all have a good weekend. See you later. Bye.